In the 19th century, public schools in many parts of the United States often read from the King James Bible as part of their daily routine. The practice was part of a broader movement known as the Common School Movement, which sought to create a shared educational experience for all American children, regardless of their religious background. The use of the King James Bible in public schools was not without controversy, however, as some saw it as an infringement on religious freedom and the separation of church and state. This controversy led to the creation of alternative schools, including Catholic schools, which offered a different curriculum that was in line with the religious beliefs of their students. The use of the King James Bible in public schools declined in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as a result of changing social and legal norms and a growing recognition of the importance of religious freedom and the separation of church and state. It should be noted that the Protestant movement in education had its roots in the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. The Reformers, led by figures such as Martin Luther and John Calvin, sought to make education more widely available to the general population. Prior to this, education was largely reserved for the elite and was often conducted in Latin, making it inaccessible to the general public. The Reformers believed that education was essential for a person's spiritual development and that everyone, regardless of social class, should have access to it. Non-secular public schools have always been the norm. The decline of religious influence in public schooling is an important movement toward religious freedom. But, did it ever fully take place? The decline in Christian influence left a power vacuum for different sets of morality, values, and philosophy to sneak their way into public institutions. Public schools have often been seen as secular institutions, separate from religious influence. However, the reality is in the past century that they have never been completely free from religious or philosophical influence. For example, the terrible views of Marx, Hegel, and postmodernists can be seen as representing New Age religious beliefs that have shaped public education today. Marxists and postmodernists love the idea of power. Their worldviews push a narrative that power is intrinsic to society, all relationships, and all things. Doesn't that sound religious in nature? Marx's idea of a classless society, Hegel's concept of the state as an embodiment of reason, and the postmodernist critique of absolute truth and objective reality, have all had a profound impact on the way that public schools are structured and operated. These Gnostic, mystical, and hermeneutic belief systems have parasitized the curriculum, the pedagogy, and the goals of public education, and have negatively shaped the way that students are taught to think about the world. These leftoid teachers use critical race theory and queer on their students, which many of them weirdly refer to as their kids. It's possessive and creepy for teachers to act in this way, but it is common in the 21st century. Teachers use the pedagogy of Herbert Marcuse's repressive tolerance to destroy free thought and open discussion. Herbert Marcuse is another whack-job critical theorist whose theories are an extension of the worst parts of Freud. He argues that the realization of the objective of tolerance requires intolerance toward prevailing policies, attitudes, opinions, and the extension of tolerance to policies, attitudes, and opinions which are outlawed or suppressed. He makes the case for liberating tolerance, which would consist of intolerance to right-wing movements and toleration of left-wing movements. I've gone into depth on this topic before. For more info, please read my article Academia's Infatuation with Marxist Ideologues and share it with your friends. Common Core. In recent history, we have seen a major push for the very unsuccessful Common Core program by the federal government. This Common Core state standards initiative is interestingly in some ways comparable to a religious movement in terms of the fervor and passion with which some people pursue it. Some proponents of Common Core see it as a solution to all the problems facing U.S. education and view it with a near-religious zeal. This belief is dumbfounding, considering it takes away a teacher's freedom to decide what's best for a student's learning needs. The obsession with administrative activism has made this even worse. Many of the advocates for Common Core are also supporters of critical theory. That theory is an effort to combine Marx with the worst parts of Freud. People who follow these theories tend to believe that power is intrinsic in all things as opposed to a traditional religious person who might believe that God is intrinsic in all things. Like many religious movements, the push for Common Core has also inspired opposition and criticism from those who see it as a threat to their beliefs and values. Critics of Common Core argue that the standards represent a federal takeover of education and will lead to a one-size-fits-all approach that is not appropriate for all students. Some view the push for Common Core as part of a broader movement toward political or ideological indoctrination and see it as a threat to traditional values and principles. Alternative schooling. Many forms of alternative schooling have been around since the 19th century. Many of these schools were established as a response to discrimination, as a means of preserving cultural and religious traditions, and to provide a high-quality education to a variety of children. This is far from the first time there has been a concerted effort to diminish the monopolistic control of the public school system. Protestant schools, Protestant denominations, including Baptists, Methodists, and Lutherans, established their own schools to provide religious education for their children. Secular schools. Some families chose to send their children to secular schools that did not include religious instruction. Parochial schools. Jewish families established parochial schools to provide a Jewish education for their children. Adventist schools. Seventh-day Adventist schools were established to provide a Christian education that aligned with the beliefs of that denomination. The creation of alternative schools reflected the diverse religious landscape of the United States in the 19th century, and the desire of families to provide religious education for their children that was in line with their beliefs. These schools continue to play an important role in American education and provide families with a range of educational options that reflect their religious and cultural values. Charter schools. Charter schools are innovative disruptors, a concept that is frowned upon in government agencies. The fear is palpable that charter schools and other competitors will force public schools to adapt to the modern world. Maybe public schools will have to teach practical life skills. The horror. The first charter schools in the United States were established in the early 1990s. The idea of charter schools was developed as a way to provide parents and educators with more control over the educational experience of students, and to promote innovation and experimentation in American education. The first charter school law was passed in Minnesota in 1991, and since then, charter schools have spread to many other states across the country. Today, there are over 7,000 charter schools in the United States, serving over 3 million students. Although there are some critics of charter schools, they have become a significant part of the American education landscape, and continue to play an important role in shaping the future of American education. Catholic and other religious schools outperform public schools. If Catholic schools were a state, they would be number one in the nation. Of course, in public schools 4 in 10 students cannot read at grade level, so is there anything to brag about? Washington Policy Center suggests 6 reasons why Catholic schools outperform state schools. 1. Catholic schools operate based on parent choice, families opt in voluntarily and are welcomed as full partners in their children's education. 2. Catholic schools are highly decentralized. They operate at the community, parish level. 3. The student population is diverse. 21% are racial minorities, 18.6% are Hispanic, and 20% are students of other faiths. Historically, the Catholic Church is an immigrant church, welcoming students of color and foreign-born children. 4. Catholic schools are efficient. Tuition averages, in 2022-23, around $12,200 per school year, well below the $18,175 average Washington public schools spend. Seattle spends $22,000 per student. Most Catholic schools provide scholarships based on need, so many students do not pay full tuition. 5. Private schools in general are flexible and responsive to families. Private schools reopened to in-person learning in September 2020, over a year earlier than public schools. 6. Private schools are free of unions and union politics, and are not subject to strikes, walkouts, protests or picketing. The first example will already send public school administrators running for the hills. If we've seen anything in the past few years, it's educational bureaucrats want nothing to do with parental choice. The future. At least the religious schools of the 19th century dramatically improved the literary skills of their students, as well as their understanding of math and civics. The same cannot be said about the current postmodernist religions foisted on children in the United States. These are pushing ideology over education, mental illness over self-efficacy, and collectivism over individual rights and responsibilities. Parents, regardless of religious affiliation or lack thereof, should insist on following the 6 items listed above as well as embracing school choice, abolishing teachers' unions and the Department of Education, and getting young people into part-time work so that they may learn practical skills. The education system needs more Booker T. Washington and far less of the communist Webb Du Bois. Unfortunately, academics tend to prefer the latter, and it shows.